Title: Shadows in the Suburb. The house stood at the end of a quiet street in a Johannesburg suburb, its windows dark and uninviting. To the neighbors, it was just another neglected property, the kind that blended into the background. But inside, horrors unfolded that no one could have imagined. Chapter 1: The Whispered Warning. It began with a faint sound, a muffled cry that drifted through the night air. Mrs. McCona, the elderly woman who lived next door, had heard it while watering her plants. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, but the cries grew louder, more desperate. She mentioned it to her neighbor, Mr. Dlamini, who shrugged it off. "Kids playing," he said. But Mrs. McCona couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Chapter 2: The Captives. Inside the house, 26 souls clung to hope in the face of despair. They were crammed into a single room, the air thick with fear and the stench of neglect. Among them was Obdi, a young man from Ethiopia who had left his village in search of a better life. He had been promised work in South Africa, but the moment he crossed the border, his dream turned into a nightmare. The captors were ruthless, their faces hidden behind masks. They spoke in harsh whispers, their words laced with threats. The captives were stripped of their dignity, their belongings, and their freedom. Some bore fresh wounds from failed escape attempts, while others sat in silence, their spirits broken. Chapter 3: The Escape. Obdi had always been resourceful, a trait that had helped him survive the treacherous journey to South Africa. He noticed the loose bars on the window and began to hatch a plan. Late one night, while the captors were distracted, he and a few others worked together to pry the bars open. The sound of metal scraping against metal was deafening in the silence, but desperation drove them forward. When the bars finally gave way, Obdi and 10 others slipped into the night. But their freedom came at a cost. The captors discovered their escape and unleashed their fury on those who remained. The screams echoed through the house, a chilling reminder of the price of defiance. Chapter 4: The Neighbor's Discovery. The next morning, Mrs. McCona noticed the broken window and the trail of blood leading away from the house. Her heart raced as she called the police, her voice trembling. Within hours, the street was swarming with officers, their faces grim as they entered the house. What they found inside would haunt them forever. 15 captives, naked and terrified, huddled together in the corner of the room. The walls bore the marks of their struggle, and the air was heavy with despair. The officers moved quickly, freeing the captives and escorting them to safety. Chapter 5: The Shadows Unmasked. The police arrested 3 suspects, their faces cold and unrepentant. Among the evidence was an illegal firearm and a ledger detailing the trafficking ring's operations. The captives were taken to a safe house, where they began the long process of healing. But the shadows of their captivity lingered. Obdi, now recovering in a hospital, vowed to tell his story, to shine a light on the darkness that had consumed so many lives. His courage inspired others to come forward, and the authorities launched a nationwide crackdown on human trafficking. Epilogue: A Ray of Hope. The house at the end of the street was demolished, its dark history erased. In its place, a community center was built, a symbol of resilience and hope. Obdi, now an advocate for trafficking survivors, stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "We cannot change the past," he said, "but we can fight for a future where no one has to endure what we did. Together, we can bring the shadows into the light." This fictionalized account captures the horror and suspense of such a situation while emphasizing the resilience of the human spirit. Let me know if you'd like to expand or adjust any part of the story.